The rain in Manhattan didn't fall. It shattered against the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Thorne Holding Group penthouse. Clara Vance held her breath, her fingers digging into the leather strap of her worn satchel. Across the mahogany conference table sat Julian Thorne, the city's most ruthless billionaire, a man whose empire was built on the ruins of competitors who underestimated him. He didn't look up from the blueprints spread before him. He didn't need to. His presence alone sucked the oxygen out of the room. "This is garbage," Julian said. His voice was a low, gravelly baritone that vibrated right through Clara's chest. Clara's heart stopped. Beside her, Jared Miller, her fiancé and the lead architect of Miller and Associates, pale-faced but putting on a brave front, cleared his throat. "Mr. Thorne, I assure you, these historical restoration plans for the Vanguard Theater are flawless. My team spent months." "Your team didn't touch this, Miller," Julian interrupted, finally lifting his head. His eyes were a piercing stormy gray, sharp enough to cut glass. He focused them entirely on Jared, ignoring Clara completely. "And if you spent months on this, you should find a new profession. The structural load calculations on the eastern arch are off by exactly 4%. A single winter storm would collapse the roof." Jared swallowed hard, the color draining from his face. "A minor oversight." "In my world, a minor oversight is a body count," Julian said flatly. He stood up, towering over the table, his tailored charcoal suit flawless. "You have 48 hours to bring me the real architect's vision. Not this watered-down, plagiarized imitation. If you fail, the contract goes to Vanguard's rivals and your firm goes under. Get out." The drive back to the office was silent, suffocatingly so. Jared gripped the steering wheel of his Audi so hard his knuckles turned white. Clara sat in the passenger seat, her mind racing. She knew exactly why the load calculations were off. Jared had stolen her rough drafts from her home studio 3 nights ago. He had been so desperate to secure the Thorne contract that he hadn't even waited for her to finish the final structural simulations. He had stamped his own name on her work and presented it as his own. Again. "You need to fix it, Clara," Jared suddenly burst out, his voice cracking with desperation as he pulled into the firm's underground parking lot. "You heard him. We have 48 hours. Clara turned to look at the man she was supposed to marry in 3 months. "We? You mean I need to fix the blueprints you took without my permission? The ones you told Julian Thorne you drew? Don't start with the technicalities right now," Jared snapped, slamming his hand against the wheel. "If Miller and Associates goes under, we lose everything. The apartment, the wedding, the future. I did this for us. Just give me the completed files tonight." Clara felt a sickening wave of coldness wash over her. It wasn't the first time Jared had used her genius to prop up his failing reputation. She had stayed in the shadows because she loved him, because she believed his promises that once they were married, they would be equal partners. But looking at his frantic, selfish expression, the scales finally fell from her eyes. "I'll think about it," she whispered, opening the car door. "Don't think, Clara. Just do it," he called after her. Clara didn't go to her desk. She needed air. She took the stairs to the rooftop terrace of the office building, the cool mist of the rain wetting her face. She pulled out her phone, intending to call her sister Elena for advice. Elena was her only remaining family, the person she trusted above anyone else. But as she approached the heavy metal door leading out to the terrace, she heard voices. Natural, hushed, and completely intimate. "He's completely clueless, baby," a woman's voice laughed. It was a melodic, high-pitched laugh that Clara recognized instantly. "Elena, Jared thinks he's using Clara, but we're the ones using both of them." Clara froze, her hand hovering inches from the door handle. Her breath hitched in her throat. "I know, honey," Jared's voice replied, dripping with a warmth he hadn't shown Clara in months. "As soon as the Thorne contract signs and the funds clear into the offshore account we set up, I'm filing for a dissolution of the firm. Clara won't get a dime. I'll leave her with the debt, and you and I will be on a flight to Paris. You promise?" Elena cooed. "Because watching you pretend to love her every day is making me sick. She's so pathetic, sitting in that dark basement office, sketching your future while we live it. I promise. Just a few more days, Elena. Let her finish the Thorne blueprints tonight, and then we're free." Clara stood rooted to the spot. The world didn't just spin. It shattered into a million jagged pieces. The two people she loved most in the world, her fiancé and her sister, were constructing her execution. Her hands began to shake violently. The betrayal was a physical weight, crushing her chest until she couldn't breathe. They didn't just want to leave her. They wanted to ruin her. They were using her passion, her life's work, as the weapon to destroy her. She didn't confront them. She didn't cry. A strange, icy stillness took over her blood. The girl who begged for scraps of affection from a narcissistic fiancé and a parasitic sister died right there in that stairwell. Clara quietly stepped away from the door, descended the stairs, and walked out of the building into the pouring rain. She walked for blocks, her mind sharp, calculating, re-architecting her entire life in a matter of minutes. They wanted the final blueprints? They wanted Julian Thorne's approval? She would give them exactly what they deserved. At 8 p.m., Clara walked into a high-end lounge downtown. She had sent a single text message 10 minutes prior to a private number she had memorized from the Thorne Holding Group directory during her brief time in the penthouse. The real architect is ready to talk. 48 hours is too long to wait. She sat at a secluded corner booth, her wet coat draped over the back of the seat. She didn't expect him to come. A man like Julian Thorne didn't cater to anonymous texts. But 5 minutes later, the atmosphere in the lounge shifted. The ambient chatter quieted. Clara looked up. Julian Thorne walked into the dim light of the lounge. He wasn't wearing his suit jacket anymore. His white dress shirt was unbuttoned at the collar, sleeves rolled up to his forearms, revealing structured, powerful wrists. He scanned the room, his gaze locking onto Clara instantly. He didn't hesitate. He walked straight to her booth and slid into the seat across from her. The emotional tension between them was immediate, a localized storm. "You're late, Miss Vance," Julian said, his gray eyes pinning her to the leather seat. Clara blinked, stunned. "You know who I am?" Julian leaned back, a dangerous, slow smile touching the edge of his lips. "I know everything that enters my boardroom. And I know Jared Miller didn't draw a single line of those blueprints. You did." He leaned forward, his face inches from hers, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "So tell me, Clara, are you here to save your fiancé's company? Or are you here to burn it down?" The silence between them stretched, thick and dangerous. Julian's gaze didn't waver. He watched her with the steady, calculating focus of a predator waiting to see which way the prey would run. "I'm here to burn it down," Clara said. Her voice didn't shake. The coldness that had taken over her chest on the rooftop terrace had solidified into something sharp, clinical, and absolute. Julian leaned back, his stormy gray eyes narrowing slightly. A faint, dark amusement flickered across his rugged features. Bold words for an assistant architect whose name isn't even on the firm's lease. "You realize if Miller and Associates goes under, your career is collateral damage." "It's not my career that's going to burn, Mr. Thorne," Clara replied, leaning forward, mirroring his posture. "Jared stole my rough drafts. He's been stealing my designs for 3 years. Right now, he and my sister are planning to funnel the advance from your project into an offshore account, dissolve the firm, and leave me holding the entire structural debt." Julian didn't look surprised. In his world, greed was the most predictable variable. "And you want me to play the executioner?" "I want you to play the businessman," Clara corrected, pulling an encrypted flash drive from her satchel and sliding it across the mahogany table. It tapped against his glass of scotch with a sharp clink. "The completed, flawless structural calculations for the Vanguard Theater are on that drive. Every arch, every load-bearing column, optimized to perfection. It's the masterpiece you actually asked for." Julian looked at the drive, then back up at her. "And what's the catch?" "You don't sign the contract with Jared," Clara said, her eyes flashing with a quiet, lethal intensity. "You string him along. You tell him the work is brilliant, but you demand a live, public presentation of the final rendering at your corporate gala on Friday night. Tell him the final signature depends on him walking the board through the engineering mechanics himself." Julian's slow, dangerous smile returned, wider this time. He understood the trap instantly. Jared was a frontman, a smooth talker who couldn't calculate a basic joist layout without Clara's notes. Forcing him onto a stage in front of New York's elite engineering minds to explain a complex structural masterpiece would be like asking a toddler to explain quantum physics. "He'll fail," Julian murmured, his voice a low, gravelly vibration. "Spectacularly." "He'll expose himself," Clara corrected. "And while he's on that stage trying to find the words, the automated emails I've scheduled will hit the state licensing board, the press, and your legal department. It contains the original timestamp CD files from my private server, proving authorship." Julian picked up the flash drive, flipping it between his long, structured fingers. "You're ruthless, Miss Vance. I like that. But what happens to the Vanguard project? I don't let sentimentality ruin my investments. The moment Jared is disqualified, I step forward with Thorne Holding Group's exclusive, pre-registered copyright under my own new LLC," Clara said, her heart hammering against her ribs, though her face remained a mask of pure confidence. "You get your theater, you get the prestige, and you get the real brain behind the blueprint. Jared gets the fraud charges." Julian stared at her for a long, agonizing moment. The tension in the booth was suffocating, a localized gravity well. Then he stood up, towering over her in the dim lounge light. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a sleek, matte black business card, sliding it into her hand. His fingers brushed against hers, sending a sudden electric jolt up her arm. "Be at my office tomorrow at 9, Clara," Julian said softly, his tone shifting from clinical to intensely personal. "Let's build your new empire." The next morning, the atmosphere at Miller & Associates was frantic. Jared was pacing his office, his tie loosened, screaming at a junior draftsperson. When he saw Clara walk in, he practically lunged at her, grabbing her by the shoulders. "Did you finish them? Tell me you finished the final calculations," he begged, his eyes bloodshot. Clara calmly removed his hands from her shoulders. "They're done. I uploaded the final package to your presentation folder an hour ago." Jared let out a ragged breath of relief, staggering backward. "God, Clara, you saved us. I knew I could count on you." Just then, Jared's phone buzzed on the desk. He snatched it up, his face shifting from panic to absolute ecstasy as he read the screen. "It's Thorne's assistant. He loved the update. He wants me to present the final rendering live at the Thorne Annual Gala tomorrow night. He said the contract is ours if I can give the board a personal walkthrough." From the doorway, Elena stepped out from the shadows, her eyes gleaming with a sickening vanity. "Oh, Jared, baby. I knew you could do it. This is it. Our ticket out." Jared turned to Clara, his corporate mask slipping back into place, cold and transactional. "Clara, you'll stay back at the office tomorrow night during the gala to monitor the server rendering speeds. We can't afford any technical glitches while I'm on stage." "Of course, Jared," Clara said, her voice dripping with a terrifyingly sweet compliance. "I'll make sure everything goes exactly according to plan." Friday night. The grand ballroom at the Plaza Hotel was a sea of black ties, diamond necklaces, and flashing cameras. The air hummed with power, wealth, and the quiet arrogance of Manhattan's elite. Jared stood near the main stage, wearing a custom tuxedo funded by the firm's dwindling credit line. Elena hovered beside him in a tight, backless crimson dress, sipping champagne, already acting like the queen of the room. "Look at them," Elena whispered into Jared's ear, nodding toward the crowd. "They're all here for you. After tonight, we never have to look at Clara's miserable face again." "Just a few more hours, honey," Jared smirked, adjusted his cufflinks. "The wire transfer to the Paris account triggers the moment I walk off this stage." Suddenly, the ambient chatter in the ballroom died down. The heavy oak double doors opened, and a collective breath caught in the room. Julian Thorne entered. He looked devastatingly handsome, a literal king of industry in a perfectly tailored midnight blue tuxedo. But it wasn't Julian who caused the room to go silent. It was the woman on his arm, Clara Vance. She wore a breathtaking midnight black silk gown that pooled at her ankles, her hair elegant, her spine perfectly straight. She didn't look like an assistant architect from a basement office. She looked like a goddess who owned the building. Her gaze locked directly onto Jared and Elena. Jared's champagne glass slipped from his fingers, shattering loudly against the marble floor. Elena choked, her face turning a ghastly shade of pale. Before Jared could even move, The MC's voice echoed through the high-end sound system. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the presentation of the Vanguard Theater Restoration. Please welcome the lead mind of Miller and Associates, Jared Miller, to explain the revolutionary structural mechanics. The applause broke out. Julian looked down at Clara, his gray eyes burning with a dark anticipatory thrill. Go on, Jared, Julian said, his voice carrying clearly across the immediate circle, a terrifying smile on his lips. The stage is yours. Tell us exactly how you built it. Jared stood under the burning stage lights, the sweat already trickling down the back of his neck, soaking his starched collar. The massive digital screen behind him displayed the intricate, three-dimensional cross-sections of the Vanguard Theater. To the untrained eye, it was a beautiful web of steel and glass. To the experts sitting in the first 3 rows, it was a complex mathematical riddle. Thank you, Mr. Thorne, Jared stammered into the microphone, his voice echoing awkwardly through the silent ballroom. He glanced desperately toward the back of the room, where Clara stood shoulder to shoulder with Julian. Clara didn't blink. She watched him with the clinical detachment of a scientist observing a lab rat sprint into a dead end. Beside her, Julian leaned slightly closer, the faint scent of his expensive cedarwood cologne washing over her. Look at him, Julian murmured, his deep baritone restricted to her ears alone. He's already looking for the exit. Do you want me to pull the rug now, or should we let him suffocate a little longer? Let him speak, Clara whispered back, her lips curling into a tight, humorless smile. He spent 3 years taking credit for my voice. Let's see what his sounds like. On stage, Jared clicked to the next slide, the Eastern Arch, the very structural element Julian had flagged 48 hours ago. As you can see, the architectural integrity relies heavily on a localized cantilever system. We balance the load by distributing the weight horizontally across the structural joists. A murmuring rippled through the front rows. Dr. Clara Vance, no relation to Clara, but the city's premier structural engineer and a close advisor to Julian, frowned, adjusting his glasses. He leaned forward to whisper to the colleague next to him. Jared caught the movement and faltered, his throat clicking as he swallowed dry air. Which means, the Eastern Arch is completely stable. We used a variable coefficient to ensure the winter load wouldn't affect the apex. A variable coefficient? Dr. Vance stood up, his voice cutting cleanly through the ambient acoustics of the ballroom. Mr. Miller, that arch uses a geometric tension array that deliberately bypasses standard horizontal distribution to preserve the historical brickwork. If you used a simple variable coefficient, you would have locked the stress points. What is the exact formula you use to calculate the dynamic thermal expansion? Jared's mouth opened but no sound came out. He looked down at his note cards, his hands shaking so violently the paper rattled against the podium. He hadn't read Clara's final notes. He had simply copied the final schematic files into the presentation folder. The calculations are proprietary to Miller and Associates, Jared choked out, his face shifting through 5 different shades of horror. We finalized them on our private server. The formula is integrated into the CAD rendering. It's a standard engineering question, Miller. Julian's voice suddenly boomed from the back of the ballroom. He didn't use a microphone, but the sheer authority in his tone commanded the entire space. He stepped into the center aisle, pulling Clara gently along with him. If you drew the blueprints, the formula should be second nature. Unless, of course, the brain behind the blueprint belongs to someone else. The entire crowd turned their heads, their gazes shifting from Julian to the elegant woman standing beside him in the midnight black gown. Elena, standing near the VIP bar, gripped her champagne flute so hard the crystal cracked. What is she doing? She hissed under her breath, her eyes wide with frantic rage. She's supposed to be at the office. Clara stepped forward, leaving Julian's side, her heels clicking rhythmically against the marble floor. The sound was deafening in the dead silence of the room. She pulled a small remote from her satin clutch and pressed the button. The massive digital screen behind Jared flickered. The beautifully rendered 3D model vanished, replaced by a split-screen interface. On the left side were Jared's submitted files, stamped with Tuesday's date. On the right side were the exact same blueprints, buried deep within a private server, showing a continuous version history spanning 6 months. Every single line, every structural correction, Every load calculation was timestamped and signed with a digital certificate belonging to one person. Clara Vance, lead architect. A collective gasp swept through the crowd. "This is an outrage," Jared shouted, his voice cracking into a desperate shriek as he pointed a trembling finger at her. "She's a disgruntled assistant. She stole my files from the office network and backdated them to sabotage this contract. Security, get her out of here." Marcus Julian, 6'2" head of security, stepped into the light near the stage, his arms folded across his chest, his expression entirely unreadable. He didn't move an inch to help Jared. "Nobody is leaving, Mr. Miller," Julian said smoothly, walking up to the edge of the stage. He adjusted the cuff of his tailored tuxedo jacket, looking up at Jared with eyes like chipped flint. "You see, my legal department received an interesting automated file drop exactly 12 minutes ago. It didn't just contain the CAD timestamps. It included the internal server logs from Miller and Associates, showing you downloading Miss Vance's private drafts at 3 o'clock in the morning from her home IP address." Jared staggered backward, hitting the edge of the podium. His face was completely bloodless. Clara stopped at the base of the stage, looking up at the man who had promised her a lifetime of partnership while planning her financial execution. "You wanted to leave me with the firm's debt, Jared," she said, her voice clear, steady, and utterly devastating. "You and Elena wanted to take the Thorne advance and fly to Paris. But you forgot one minor detail." She looked over at Elena, whose face had gone completely gray. "I own the exclusive copyright to the Vanguard design," Clara said flatly. "And I've just transferred it to my own independent firm. You have no contract, Jared. You have no assets. And in approximately 2 minutes, you won't even have your freedom." The heavy double doors of the ballroom swung open, and 3 uniformed officers from the New York Police Department entered, their badges gleaming under the chandeliers. Jared looked at the police, then at Clara, his eyes wide with a feral cornered panic. He didn't look like a successful CEO anymore. He looked like a fraudulent imitation that had finally run out of air. He scrambled off the side of the stage, lunging toward Clara, his hands outstretched in a desperate, unhinged plea. "Clara, please. It was a mistake. We can fix this." Before his fingers could even brush her dress, Julian stepped directly into his path, his massive frame completely shielding Clara from view. Julian's hand clamped onto Jared's wrist with a grip that made Jared drop to his knees in agony. "Don't touch her," Julian growled, his voice dropping to a terrifying, lethal frequency. As the officers moved in to clamp the cuffs around Jared's wrists, a sudden piercing shriek cut through the chaos from the back of the room. Clara turned her head just in time to see Elena sprinting toward the side exit, her red dress rustling, her clutch dropped on the floor. But the double doors were already locked. Elena's heels skidded on the polished marble as she slammed against the locked brass handles of the side exit. She rattled them frantically, her breathing ragged, her perfect composure completely unraveled. "Open the door. Let me out," she screamed, her voice cracking as she turned back to face the ballroom. The crowd of Manhattan's elite had parted, forming a wide, silent circle of judgment. Nobody moved to help her. Nobody even looked at her with sympathy. In the world of high finance, a thief was bad, but an exposed sloppy thief was social leprosy. Clara walked slowly down the center aisle, her midnight black silk gown trailing behind her like liquid shadow. Julian walked half a step behind her, his presence a towering protective wall of charcoal wool and cold steel. "There's nowhere to run, Elena," Clara said, her voice dropping to a calm, terrifying register. "The servers are locked. The wire transfer to your offshore account was flagged and frozen by Thorne Holding Group's cybersecurity team 10 minutes ago. You aren't going to Paris. You aren't going anywhere." Elena pressed her back against the wooden door, her eyes darting between Clara and the approaching police officers. "Clara, please. I'm your sister. Your only family. You can't do this to me." "Family?" Clara stopped 5 feet away, looking at the woman she had shared a childhood with, the woman whose medical bills she had quietly paid for years. "Family doesn't sit on a rooftop terrace and laugh about leaving me with hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt. Family doesn't call me pathetic for working in a basement while you steal the life I built. It was Jared's idea." Elena sobbed, pointing a manicured nail at Jared, who was currently being pinned against the stage by 2 officers. He manipulated me, Clara. He told me he was going to leave you anyway. I only did it because I was scared of losing him. Liar. Jared roared from the stage, his face twisted in a feral grimace as the handcuffs clicked into place. You're the one who found the offshore routing numbers. You're the one who told me to take her rough drafts before she could back them up. Enough, Julian interrupted. The single word slammed down on the room like a gavel. He didn't look at Jared or Elena. His gray eyes were fixed entirely on Clara, checking her face for any sign of regret or weakness. Finding none, he turned his cold gaze to the lead officer. Take them. The formal complaints for grand larceny, corporate fraud, and intellectual property theft have already been submitted by my legal team. As the officers dragged Jared and Elena toward the main entrance, Elena screamed one last time, her voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings. You think you won, Clara? You think this billionaire actually cares about you? You're just a new asset to him. He'll discard you the second your designs stop making him money. The heavy doors slammed shut, cutting off her voice, and taking the last remnants of Clara's old life with it. The ballroom slowly began to breathe again. Music swelled softly from the orchestra stage, and guests began to murmur, their attention shifting back to the dynamic shift in power at the center of the room. Clara stood frozen for a fraction of a second, the adrenaline finally starting to drain from her veins, leaving a hollow, exhausting ache in its place. She had burned down her past. The scaffold was gone, but looking out at the sea of wealthy strangers, she suddenly felt entirely exposed. A warm, heavy weight settled over her shoulders. Clara blinked, looking down. Julian had removed his midnight blue tuxedo jacket and draped it gently over her bare shoulders. The scent of cedarwood, expensive tobacco, and clean rain enveloped her, instantly grounding her racing thoughts. You did well, Julian murmured, his deep baritone brushing against the side of her neck as he leaned down. But you're shaking. Come on. Let's get you out of the circus. He didn't wait for her permission. His hand slid down to the small of her back, his touch firm, possessive, and surprisingly reassuring as he guided her through the VIP exit, bypassing the paparazzi waiting at the front gates. 10 minutes later, they were sitting in the back of Julian's private, armored Maybach, navigating through the rain-slicked streets of Tribeca. The partition was up, separating them from the driver, creating a small, intensely private universe of black leather and soft, amber ambient light. Clara leaned her head against the cool glass window, watching the city lights blur into long neon streaks. She was right about one thing, she said quietly, her voice barely a whisper against the hum of the engine. Julian shifted in his seat, turning his lower body toward her. He reached out, his long fingers gently catching her chin and turning her face away from the window, forcing her to look directly into his stormy gray eyes. About what? I am just an asset to you, Clara said, her heart doing a dangerous erratic flip against her ribs. You needed the Vanguard design to beat your rivals. I gave it to you. Now that the fraud is exposed, what happens to the real architect? Julian's gaze darkened, his thumb brushing slowly against her jawline. The physical proximity between them was suffocating, a silent current pulling them closer until she could feel the heat radiating from his chest. You think I went to that downtown lounge on a rainy Thursday night because of a theater blueprint, Clara? Julian asked, his voice dropping to a gravelly, intimate whisper. He leaned in closer, his lips inches from hers. I have 100 architects on my payroll. I didn't need a blueprint. I wanted the woman who had the fire to burn down her own life to save her integrity. Clara's breath hitched. Before she could answer, his phone on the console vibrated sharply, the screen lighting up with a high-priority alert from Thorne Holding Group's security center. Julian glanced down, his brow pulling into a tight, lethal frown as he read the encrypted text. The air inside the luxury car turned instantly arctic. What is it? Clara asked, a sudden wave of apprehension washing over her. Julian slid the phone into his pocket, his grip tightening around her hand until it was almost painful. Jared didn't just try to steal your money, Clara. Before he was arrested, he leaked the unencrypted structural vulnerability codes of the Thorne server to a third party. Someone just bypassed our perimeter, and they aren't looking for files. He looked out the front windshield as the Maybach screeched to a sudden violent halt in the middle of a deserted warehouse district. They're coming for you. The headlights of the Maybach flickered, illuminating the rusty iron skeletons of abandoned loading docks. Outside, the rain had turned into a torrential downpour, drumming against the reinforced glass with a deafening rhythm. Julian, what do you mean they're coming for me? Clara asked, her voice tight as she pulled his tuxedo jacket closer around her shoulders. The scent of him was the only thing anchoring her to reality. Julian didn't answer right away. He was already tapping a rapid sequence into a secure communication app on his phone. Jared was a coward, but he wasn't stupid. He knew if he fell, he'd lose everything. He sold the structural backdoors of my private cloud network to Vanguard's black market rivals, the Blackwood Syndicate, as an insurance policy. He turned to her, his gray eyes dark with a protective fury that sent a shiver straight down her spine. They don't want the theater blueprints anymore, Clara. They want the programmer who can decrypt the proprietary firewall keys. That's you. Before Clara could process the gravity of his words, a sharp metallic thud echoed from the front of the car. Through the tinted glass partition, Clara saw the silhouette of their driver collapse forward against the steering wheel. The digital dashboard went entirely black. The ambient amber lighting fizzled out, plunging the cabin into a suffocating, freezing darkness. Marcus! Julian barked into his earpiece. Silence answered him. The electronic jammer outside had completely neutralized their comms. Julian! Clara's breath hitched. Shadows were moving through the downpour outside. 4 heavily armed figures wearing matte black tactical gear, their faces obscured by ballistic masks. One of them stepped up to the passenger door, raising a hydraulic pneumatic piston. Get down! Julian grabbed Clara by the waist, throwing his massive frame over her just as the passenger window shattered into a million safety glass fragments. The pressure wave of the breach hit them like a physical blow. Heavy hands reached into the cabin, grasping for Clara's gown, but Julian wrestled them back with brutal, unbridled efficiency. He threw a blind, heavy elbow into the mask of the nearest attacker, the sound of fracturing bone echoing inside the car. Run, Clara! Into the warehouse! Julian roared, pinning 2 of the men against the ruined doorframe with his body. Don't look back. Clara didn't hesitate. Her survival instincts, honed by years of surviving Jared's psychological traps, kicked into high gear. She scrambled over the driver's seat, kicked her heels off and pushed the driver's side door open. Her bare feet slapped against the freezing, flooded asphalt as she sprinted toward the rusted metal jaws of the nearest warehouse. Behind her, the sounds of grunts, breaking glass, and heavy impacts echoed through the rain. Julian was fighting them off alone, but the odds were entirely against him. She burst into the dark cavern of the warehouse, her breath tearing from her lungs in ragged, burning gasps. The air inside smelled of stagnant oil and wet concrete. She navigated blindly through a maze of wooden crates and heavy machinery, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She tucked herself into a narrow alcove between 2 massive shipping containers, pressing her back against the cold steel, trying to quiet her breathing. Footsteps echoed from the entrance, heavy, methodical, and unhurried. Miss Vance! A cultured, unfamiliar voice called out into the darkness, the echo making it impossible to pinpoint. There's no need for the theatricals. Jared Miller is currently sitting in a holding cell, and your sister is signing a full confession. They are yesterday's news. We are offering you a global stage. Clara squeezed her eyes shut, her hands shaking as she pulled out her phone. It was completely dead, the jammer was still active. She was entirely on her own. We know you wrote the source code for Thorne's structural encryption. The voice continued, closer this time. Left aisle. Give us the decryption keys and we'll ensure your new LLC receives funding that makes Julian Thorne look like a petty landlord. Refuse. And we'll simply take the server logs from your apartment. With or without your permission. A sudden violent crashing sound erupted from the front gates. The screech of tearing metal tore through the warehouse as Julian bypassed the jammer's perimeter by driving a heavy security forklift straight through the loading doors. The intruder in tactical gear spun around, raising a silenced weapon, but Julian didn't give him the chance. He leapt from the moving vehicle, tackling the man to the ground with a force that cracked the concrete beneath them. Clara! I'm here! Julian shouted, his white dress shirt torn and stained with grease and blood, his knuckles raw. Clara stepped out from the shipping containers, a wave of profound relief washing over her. But as she moved toward him, her eyes locked onto a second shadow slipping out from the upper catwalk directly above Julian. The barrel of a rifle gleamed under the shattered skylight, aimed straight at his chest. "Julian, look up!" she screamed. The crack of the rifle shot tore through the cavernous warehouse, a deafening sound that shattered the remaining panes of the high skylights. Clara didn't think. She lunged forward, throwing her weight into Julian just as a spark exploded off the concrete floor exactly where he had been standing. They went down together, rolling into the shadow of a heavy steel generator as a second mercenary descended from the metal catwalk, his boots clanging sharply against the iron steps. "Are you hit?" Clara gasped, her hands trembling as they frantically searched his torn shirt, feeling for the warmth of blood. Julian's fingers clamped over hers, his grip tight enough to leave bruises, his breathing heavy but steady. His gray eyes burned with a lethal, unyielding intensity in the darkness. "No. Because of you." He leaned closer, his forehead resting against hers for a single desperate second. "I told you to run, Clara. I'm done running from men who want to use my work as a weapon," she whispered, her voice hardening, the fear evaporating into pure, calculated adrenaline. "The encryption keys they want aren't on my home server. They're on an automated loop. If my heart rate or location data from my smartwatch flags an anomaly for more than 15 minutes, the entire Thorne Holding architecture triggers a hard wipe. They'll get nothing but dust." Julian let out a low, gravelly laugh, a sound laced with profound admiration. "You really are a dangerous woman, Miss Vance." "They're closing in," she muttered, pointing to the shifting shadows weaving through the maze of wooden crates. "We have less than 3 minutes before they realize it's a trap." "Then we change the structure," Julian said flatly. He stood up, pulling her to her feet, his tailored stature completely reclaiming the space despite the chaos. He reached into the control panel of the backup generator beside them and ripped the main breaker handle downward. The entire warehouse went dead silent. The electronic jammers, powered by the building's auxiliary grid, cut out instantly. Clara's smartwatch vibrated against her skin, the cellular signal bars flashing back to life in a brilliant neon blue. The automated protocol she had designed didn't just wipe data. It sent a high-frequency distress ping directly to the nearest precinct, carrying federal-level infrastructure breach tags. "The police are already rerouting from the gala," Clara called out into the dark, her voice echoing off the high rafters, clear, confident, and mocking. "You have exactly 60 seconds before federal tactical units lock down this entire district. If you want the keys, you'll have to carry them through a barricade." The footsteps in the dark stopped. A muted curse echoed from the left aisle, followed by the frantic rustle of tactical gear, as the mercenaries realized their window of anonymity had completely collapsed. The threat of Julian Thorne was one thing, but a direct confrontation with a citywide tactical grid was a losing business model. Within seconds, the low, distant wail of sirens began to bleed through the heavy downpour outside, building in layers until the red and blue emergency lights began to sweep across the warehouse walls through the shattered windows. The shadows vanished into the rain, retreating back into the city's underbelly like ghosts. 3 months later, the summer sun over Manhattan was blinding, reflecting off the restored facade of the Vanguard Theater. The scaffolding had finally come down, revealing the flawless sweeping curves of the Eastern Arch, standing perfectly solid against the azure sky. Clara stood on the plaza, a glass medallion resting against her collarbone, catching the afternoon light. Inside the clear glass, the intricate structural schematics she had fought for were etched in microscopic gold lines, a beautiful permanent preservation of her survival. The board just finalized the press release. A deep, familiar baritone sounded behind her. Clara turned to see Julian walking toward her, his tailored charcoal suit immaculate, his tie loosened slightly in the summer heat. He stopped a mere inch away, his presence immediately enveloping her, his eyes warm as they looked down at her. "Vance Architectural Group is officially the sole master planner for the entire Thorne Historical District," Julian said, a rare, genuine smile touching his lips. "Jared's sentencing was handed down this morning. Minimum security, 10 years for corporate espionage and structural fraud." Elena signed her plea deal an hour later. Clara let out a long, clean breath, the last remnants of the old weights lifting from her shoulders. "And the Vanguard?" It opens tonight, Julian murmured, his voice dropping to a low, intimate register that made her skin prickle with anticipation. He reached out, his long fingers gently trailing along the edge of her glass medallion before settling against the nape of her neck, pulling her half a step closer. But I didn't bring the contract out here to talk about buildings, Clara. Clara looked up into his stormy gray eyes, her heart doing that familiar erratic flip. No. For 3 months you've been perfectly professional, Julian whispered, his thumb brushing against her jawline, his gaze locking onto her lips with a hunger that was impossible to mistake. You've matched every corporate metric, answered every email, and kept your boundaries flawless. But the project is built. The blueprint is finished. He leaned down, his breath warm against her cheek, his voice a gravelly command that occupied her entire world. So tell me, lead architect, what are we building next? Leave a comment telling me. Did Jared and Elena get what they deserved? Or should the revenge have been even harsher? If you enjoyed this journey of emotional drama, high-stakes suspense, and sweet, meticulous revenge, don't forget to like and subscribe for more addictive stories.